First thing I want to do is take this lower ball joint apart, but I got to get, in order to get the lower ball joint out of there, I got to take this assembly off of the lower ball joint. You can see there's a nut, what is it, like a 22 or 23 millimeter, 22. So I'm going to have to loosen that nut. Might be tight. No, it's not that tight. And separate again. It's the same kind of a tapered shaft. In order to separate it, I'm going to have some kind of a tie rod separator. And because it's all off the car and everything, it's going to be difficult to separate it with that big wedge tool, that pickling fork. So I'm going to try my tie rod separator tool on this particular one. This one is the right size. Yes, it is. And so you see what happens? It just goes underneath like that, and then the screw fits against the shaft of the ball joint, and by turning down you can separate the two, so you're just putting pressure that way. I don't know what size that particular, it's probably about a 19. So this time we're going to separate it using the tie rod tool. And what it does is it builds up a lot of pressure, and then it finally just, it pops when it separates. Like that. So now that's separated, and you can see that's the ball joint. See how sloppy that is? Look at all the play in that. These cars are pretty hard on lower ball joints, and that ball joint is just completely worn out. See all that play? So at some point, if it ever wore completely out, I guess it could separate, but the problem is you're really going to chew tires up with a ball joint like that. So we're going to replace that, but in order to get to it, we got to literally drive it out of there, and so we've got to take this backing plate off, and this thing right here is called the steering knuckle, and we've got to take it apart. So we might as well just take this apart now. We might have to put it in a vise. It's probably going to be easier. We might take the backing plate off first. It looks like 5 millimeters on there. And I took the backing plate off and I put the whole thing in a vise. And I know those things are going to be tight, so I might as well just use a breaker bar. And they're typically put on there with Loctite because, again, it's the steering, and for safety's sake. And we'll put it back together with Loctite as well. But I can tell that they've been assembled with Loctite. Now we got the arm off where the tie rod connects. Now we can get the ball joint out. So again, the lower ball joint's just as bad as it could be. And it drives out of there from the bottom, so you literally have to drive it that direction. If you look at the new one, you can see that the new one is going to go in like that, and it's got little teeth on it. And so it's driven in, and actually it's pressed in, and that's the reason we need that special tool. But you'd be surprised how tight it'll be in there and how hard you have to beat it to drive it out. And again, I typically put it in a vise like that and drive it out while it's in a vise. It's the only way I've ever been able to get them out of there. So what I'm going to do is drive that out. Now I need a big hammer and a piece of steel. Okay, you can see I've used that thing several times for the same purpose. I just put a pair of vice grips around it and pound on it. Once it starts, it'll be a lot easier, but sometimes getting it started is quite a challenge. Start it down, and once I get it started, it's going to be a lot easier, but it took a lot of pounding to get it to that place. once it starts, it's reasonably easy to get out of there. And again, you can see how bad that one. See, they're packed in grease, and then there's seals that go around the top of them. And so once the seal gives out, the joint just wears out. So now I'm going to press this one in from the bottom. So it goes in like that, get it started straight. And that's where our special tool comes in. And that's why these things are so difficult to have done in a machine shop, because they can't get a straight run at it with a standard press. So you see, because of the curvature of that steering knuckle, they can't get on this thing, this lip, with a straight on press. And so it takes this special tool to press that thing in. You got to be really careful to get this tool in there exactly correctly, because it takes an incredible, you'd be surprised the force that it takes to pull that thing in there.
Coming off.
Cut. Now it does take an incredible amount of pressure to press this thing in there. You'd be surprised how much force it takes. I think I got it. It's all the way down. I just can't budge it any more than that. So that ought to be it. Pressed it in. That ball joint, the bottom of it, is flush with the steering knuckle. And of course, that's why we couldn't press it anymore. Finally got in there. But I'm telling you, it takes some force to press that in there.
Wiggle that one around. Let's see the difference.
Well, you can barely wiggle that one.
Okay.
It's so tight, it's brand new.
Oh, I
but
see.
It's very hard to turn. See, it's packed in grease.
Oh.
It's tight.
Big difference.
Yeah, real big difference. I'm going to set that ball joint assembly aside, and now I'm going to disassemble the rest of this so that I can change these bushings and that ball. And theoretically, I could do it with them assembled, but it's just easier if you take them apart and take this piece out. I want to inspect those bushings anyway. Those rubber bushings, just to see if they're worn out. This bushing looks like it's good, but just in case, I'll show you. There's nothing to replacing it. It's a notched bushing and bolt that holds this arm on there, so it holds it in the right place. But as soon as you take this bolt off, and you just, sometimes they're in there kind of tight just from being in there so many years. Boy, that one is tight. You can see that eventually they will come apart. Might have to put it in the vise to tap it out of there. I don't want to booger it into that bolt. Oops. See, that goes, well, you can see how it fits right against the shaft that way. I might go ahead and replace those. Those are a little bit worn. But the bolt's kind of rusted around there. I'm going to have to keep twisting it in order to get the bolt out of that shaft. I might have to put a little WD-40 on it. It's not threaded or anything at that point. It's just stuck. With these bushings is that, you know, there's a little tube that goes in the middle between those bushings, and if I show you on the other side, because I've already started pounding this one, but it's like that, okay, this little tube, and it's flared out on both ends, so it holds the bushing in there. So usually what I do is just take a chisel and just chisel it up on the edge. You could use a chisel, you could use a Dremel tool to cut the lip of it off, whatever you have to do. Once you get it started though, you should be able to drive it out of there. Sometimes they can get pretty stubborn. They come out like that, it's what the bolt goes through, and so they're flared on both ends. So you have to take them out of there, and then somehow you got to get that bushing out afterwards. Now it depends on how worn it is. Sometimes they're kind of easy, sometimes they're real difficult. That one is actually relatively easy. It's coming right out. It's just an indication of how worn it is. But that one was pretty easy to pound out of there. I might need to get a bigger tool to get this one all the way out, but I want this. No, it's going to come out of there fairly easily. So those are the bushings that I want to replace. So the new bushing assembly, let's see, it's right here. It just goes in just backwards to the way it came out, and then what you do is it comes unflared on one edge like that. So what we're going to do is put it in there and then put that tube through there. But you can and then flare it on that end. But you can see we're going to have a booger of a time getting that bushing just pressed in there, unless we do something other than just you know, other than just our hands. We're not going to be able to do it. So usually I make it wet with something, soap preferably, and then I put it in a vise, or I take a big bolt, whatever I have, and suck it together, and then I put this tube in last. So let's try that. Let's see. I can't remember whether this particular vise opens wide enough or not, but I think it does. So first let's get some soap. A little soap on it. Both sides. Make it a little slick. And then if the vise will open far enough. And I can't remember whether it will or not.
Do you do both at the same time?
I typically do, but I might be able to do one and then the other, just because the vise won't open big enough. Looks like I can do it that way. Now if you don't have a vise this big, another way that I have done it is with a bolt. I just take a bolt and nuts and washers and use that as a press. But this is going to work fine. Press it in there nice and tight. And then put this in. And sometimes what I have to do is do that to get the tube. And actually the whole thing will be held together by the assembly of the car. I typically don't even have to flare that. But just to maybe to give it a little flare. You got to be careful because I want to be able to get that bolt through there as well. And I can see I didn't really get it flared, but that's okay. I think I can still force it between, you know, the A-frame of the car and get it pushed up in there. So I'll just set this aside for a moment, and well, actually, well, now I've got several options. I could put this on, and then I could put the steering knuckle on. I think it's easier to assemble this now as opposed to later, just because of the position of that bolt. So I could put that bolt on there, also put that rod back on there. I happen to have the bushings, so I might as well get that rod on there with that ball and socket. Now, as you recall, we need still to change this particular ball joint, and you know, what you buy is a new ball joint. Now what I always do is just count the threads, clean that off and count the threads so that I get the same distance, so that I get this one screwed in there the same distance as that. But actually, I'm not even going to use this. I just showed you this for illustrative purposes. I've got one that's really good that I took off that wrecked car, and I'm going to use it instead. Now, it doesn't really matter which way this nut is right here. That's just to clamp it down once it's adjusted. So you could put it in that way or you could put it in that way. You might think about the technician that has to align the car and make it as easy as you can for that person. So these go in, of course, where they're aligned like that. And then the steel goes, and then the steel goes underneath. So I'll take this new, it's got a new locking washer, so I don't have to use Loctite on this particular assembly. And then you can see it's real straightforward to put it back together. Now I want to put this on there, but I don't want to tighten it so tight that I can't move it, because when I put it on, when I actually assemble it on the car, I've got to be able to move this slightly. So I want to tighten it, but not just so clamped down so tight that I can't adjust it later. All I really care about is making sure that those two bushings are lined up on that, like that. So that I can twist it and get it in there properly once I get that assembled. And now I want to take the steering knuckle, put it back on there, and I have a big bolt, and I always get a new one. You'll notice with the new ball joint, you get a new locking nut that you use to assemble it back. So now sometimes as you tighten this, the ball spins in the socket until the wedge takes effect. But you see that wedge, that taper allows you to lock down on that shaft, or effectively it's a self-locking shaft because of that taper. That's a 22 millimeter socket. That nut is a 22 millimeter in this particular application. Now I can see that the shaft already appears to have snugged up against that taper, I hope. Maybe. If not, what I need to do is just, you know, press the taper together like that so that the shaft starts to lock. Against itself, and it did. Of course, you're going to feel it when it gets tight. Now I'm going to put it up in the vise to really tighten it up. And the whole assembly together is a little bit awkward. I'm going to put some torque on that. It's got a lock nut, so it's not that critical, but I just want that taper tight. That's tight. Okay, now that piece is close to ready to go back. Before we put it back though, we've got to take that upper control arm assembly off. So let's go do that. There's a big bolt that goes through it in the top side of the car. It's 19 millimeter a locking nut on a bolt. And so what we're going to do, and these can be really tight because again, it's probably put on there with Loctite. We're going to pull the bolt off first, and then we're going to go down underneath, and there's another little bolt to pull. Once I got it loose, I'm going to use a ratchet because it's a long bolt. There's another little nut underneath where the torsion bar hooks onto the assembly. There's a 17 millimeter bolt that also bolts to that assembly, and as soon as I take that off and take that bolt out, then this front upper control arm will all come down out of there. Got that bolt off. Sometimes these are a little stuck. There's a couple of bushings there. Out. Once that bolt comes out, then the whole thing should come out of there, and it does. Now, of course, what wears is that bushing, so we just want to replace that whole assembly. Now, that one's pretty loose as well, so it's starting to wear. It wasn't worn all the way out, but while we're here, we're just going to replace it. As you may recall, I said I had one that was practically new that I'm just going to replace it with. So all we're going to do is put it in from the bottom and then assemble it with these. Sometimes this one can be a little stubborn, as I recall, because you got to get the bolt in there, and then at the same time you got to get it right here. Usually what I do is you have to put this in first, then put it up there, and then you have to align it. And sometimes, because of the pressure of the torsion bar, it can be a challenge to align this bolt going into that hole. So let's see how tough this one is. You can see this one's not quite aligned, but it's awfully close. A lot of times what I do is get a punch or a drift pin and use the wedge of the drift pin to try to align it as best I can before I attempt to stick a bolt through that hole. And I don't know whether I've got it good enough or not, but I'll try it. Sometimes if I can just get it started, and sometimes it's a booger to get it lined up on the other side, and this one isn't perfectly lined. It's going in kind of crooked. So it's going to be a challenge to get this one lined, I believe. Sometimes I can do it from the bottom, but it's off by quite a bit. It's about half in the hole and half out. So I'm gonna have a challenge getting this in today. I can see that. Frequently, what'll help is to go ahead and assemble this torsion bar assembly and tighten it up a bit, and that helps you line this up, believe it or not. So that's what I'm going to do. Just has a, as you may recall, you just put a bolt in that, as you see in the end. But that's a little tight. Actually, it was assembled with Loctite, and I'm going to go ahead and put some on it. You can see the blue Loctite on there. Front end steering parts and suspension parts I'm pretty particular about, so let's put a drop of Loctite on there. The bolt through there, and I use blue Loctite. I don't like that red. That's permanent stuff. If you ever want to take this thing apart again, I would advise that you not use the red. So even though it's in a red tube, it's really the medium Loctite, the blue is not as permanent. So you're going to put this on, and it is a lock washer. And then we're going to tighten up the bolt on the bottom, and we'll have the front assembly, the front upper control arm, on there. Now we're ready to go back with that assembly that we had, the lower ball joint and the bushing and so forth.